our first album. Go ahead and run the numbers, and then we'll give the floor to Josh for the first take, so to speak. Of
so this is the highest ranked album on Best Ever Albums, in number 910 in the 1970s. This is, again, Heart Like a Wheel by Linda Ronstadt. And
this is Linda Ronstadt's highest, right? That's what you...
Correct. Well, no, it's the high. Well, the albums that we're covering tonight, this is the... I'm sorry. It's the highest number. It's the lowest ranked album. It's number 910 in the 1970s.
Gotcha.
So we're starting low and going high. My bad. Good. Yeah, I screwed those up. High, low. I get confused. It was ranked 83 in 1974, an overall rank of 5,231. However, in Rolling Stone, it did make their list at number 490.
There you go. So just sneaking in.
Yep.
All right, Josh, thoughts on Linda Ronstadt, who I actually read this week was the highest, I believe, the highest selling female artist of the 1970s.
Wow. Okay. Well, I really enjoyed this album. This is probably my favorite of the batch this week, of the 5. And my main takeaway is that she is kind of like the next generation of country, female country artists that we've talked about. I was trying to think of when the last time we covered a pure country album, or at least a female artist, and it was probably Dolly Parton and Loretta Lynn, right? Yeah, I think. And so I feel like this is kind of a newer version of that. It's definitely country, but she's got a great voice, and she incorporates some rock into it. And I think she's not afraid to incorporate some harmonizing with other female backup singers, and even another a male singer at one point, I think, on maybe Heart Like a Wheel, the title track. And or Faithless Love, I can't remember. There's a duet on one and backup singer on another. And it also's got that, even though it's like country and it's got some rock elements, it's also got a 70s feel to it. I got like a Stevie Nicks vibe from her in terms of voice, and maybe the Eagles, something like that. I feel like she's in good company with those people. She probably toured with them at some point, I imagine. And it feels very much like a kind of a crossover hit. I feel like even though it's country, it probably, I mean, if she was the biggest female artist of the 70s, then it was definitely a crossover. I feel like she has appeal across genres. And and the main thing is that I really enjoyed her voice, and she's got this emotion that comes through in her singing. She's got sadness at times, and she's got happiness. She's got some great lyrics too, like Unwilling. She's got one about, in the chorus, she said she wants weed, whites, and wine. I thought that was a funny line. But yeah, it's like really solid country rock, in my opinion.
Okay, that's a start for it. Matt, want to continue with your thoughts?
Yeah, so this was a surprise for me. There are several Easter eggs in here for me, because I recognized 3 of them for easy. You know, You're No Good started off right away, and I'm like, I know that song. And it kind of just, this whole album, I was like, well, I know I've heard of Linda Ronstadt for years. I didn't really know any of her songs. I couldn't have told you a Linda Ronstadt song. I couldn't have told you what genre she was. So the fact that this is a mostly country-sounding album was a little surprising to me. I thought, I didn't really find You're No Good to be kind of a country song, but the second track, It Doesn't Matter Anymore, I was like, okay, it sounds like country, but they don't really have country instruments going on. And then halfway through, the slide guitar comes in. I'm like, okay, there you go. And then it just takes off from there with some banjo and a lot of other, and some
violin,
songs in here.
I think.
Yeah, and some songs in here are very country, like full-blown Loretta Lynn, Dolly Parton type country. So I agree with you, Josh. There's a little bit of a mixture, a little crossover here as well. But I was really psyched to hear "When Will I Be Loved." That's a great song that I've known for years. It's one of those songs that I've always known, but never really knew who did it or where it was from or anything like that. But that was just a very bouncy, catchy, upbeat, fun song.
Isn't that a cover though too? I
think they're all covers. I think. Well.
Oh really? Okay.
But I did do so after, because there was enough in here to keep me to pique my curiosity. So I did look a little bit. But yeah, all these songs. I don't think she wrote any of these. These are all of the other songwriters that are doing this. And that song, I think the When Will I Be Loved is an Everly Brothers song, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, I wrote down Buddy Holly, but yeah, that makes sense. Everly Brothers.
But she made it famous. Like this version is the most well known or best selling version. And I knew the song "Willin'." That was a big surprise for me because I knew that from an obscure artist named Richard Schindel, whose live album "The Courier" from like 2002. I've known for many years. My brother was big into that, and so he burned me a copy. And that's a great like acoustic folk Americana type live recording, and he does a version of that. So she starts playing it, and I'm going, this sounds like that Richard Schindel, and it's the exact same song. So I'm like, oh, I love this song. So I like this album mainly for those reasons. It was just like a couple songs peppered in here that I was surprised at. So it's kind of cool to trace some of these songs back to a specific person or a specific album. But yeah, I agree with you, Josh. I think her voice is fantastic. There's some great moments in here. It's just a really crisp, lush, really, and in sometimes powerful voice. That's very very easy to listen to. And I felt like I didn't really get a good look at the background singers or anything like that. But this sounds like James Taylor might be having a part in this somewhere, like singing. And if he doesn't, there's dudes on here that sound like him. But that last track in particular, which it is a James Taylor song. I did see that he did write that, but it is. I was thinking, this sounds like that Laurel Canyon, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Carole King type stuff. That was a very, kind of folk rock type song. So I think the only song on here that I was kind of like on was the title track, Heart Like a Wheel. It was a little that dramatic ballad with a string quartet. It was okay. It was kind of pretty, but it wasn't as I don't know, as it didn't stand out to me as much as a lot of the other songs did. So yeah, I was surprised. I wasn't expecting this country type stuff that she came with, but or the songs that I knew already. But I liked it. It was a good listen.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Well, I must be honest. Linda Ronstadt's one of these names that I'm gonna pull like a Matt, where I am aware of her outside of the context of what we're talking about her tonight. When I think of historically Linda Ronstadt, I first thing I thought was I don't know much of her work. I know You're No Good because I think that's omnipresent, right? So like that's the first thing I think of, like that. The second thing is I think of all those duets she did in the 80s, like the American Tail song and that I don't know much, but I Know I Love You, like song with, is it like
that was the Neville
Bryson
brothers, wasn't
or
it?
Neville. Yeah, I mean, there's like one with like she was with all those like random, like James Ingram, I think was one of them. And it was a Neville brother. I think you're right. I don't know. Aaron, maybe Neville. And then, like Peebo, like she made a lot of those things. And then I also always know that Linda Ronstadt, and I hate how, like, this goes back to Carly Simon too, how a lot of the female artists of the 70s and 80s were defined by who they dated, which I don't want to go in that. But I always thought it was odd that she dated Jerry Brown when he was the governor of California, and then was engaged to George Lucas, I think, if I remember. So I knew her more as a like celebrity as much as anything. So I was actually really interested to hear what this album was going to sound like. So You're No Good came on at the beginning. I'm like, well, that makes sense. That's the clear hit. And then the rest of the album happened, and I said, wow, I'm listening to a country album. Yeah. And I started saying, this is interesting because this is in many ways like what would happen if you took a country album and you gave it like LA production. And that's what I thought of with this album. It was like if you take the Eagles sort of sound and production, and it makes sense because I want to say she's from Arizona, if I remember correctly, Linda Ronstadt. And so and I know she was in that California area, right? A lot with those, the James Taylor and the Eagles and who else? Jackson Brown and all those people that were out there. I was not as high on this album as you guys were. It was, it just didn't punch buttons for me. It felt like very much a 70s album, and in the way when we talk about there's 70s albums in a good way and then 70s albums that kind of don't transcend. It had both a throwback feel and I guess modern as of 74 feel, but I didn't feel that it had legs after that era. And that's a little bit as I go through these albums, I do feel the ones that stand out to me are the ones that have a little bit of legs outside of the decade. When something is grounded in the decade, it's always harder for me in some ways to appreciate it, if that makes sense. Especially when it sounds very much of a specific time. Now, if it doesn't last to today, that's okay. But if it doesn't have legs, in my opinion, outside of maybe 2 or 3 years afterwards, and I'll be interested to see as we keep listening in the 70s where it goes. But I mean, Linda Ronstadt's singing voice is exceptional. I mean, that's the number one thing she has going for her. I always felt that she is akin to Pat Benatar, another person who just has pipes, right, and very versatile pipes, and can easily delve into blue-eyed soul if need be, and big pop ballads and stuff. So I always felt that I think Pat Benatar was like evolutionary Linda Ronstadt, but Pat Benatar kind of carved out a different, more rock and roll niche. And I guess Linda Ronstadt's is more of like a country niche, unless this is unrepresentative of the rest of her work. And it's interesting because there's a huge gap between this and the stuff that I was aware of her, which was big, duets from the late 80s, which is, a lifetime after this. So that's kind of my overall takeaway. It's pretty boilerplate lyrics. It's a lot about love and heartbreak and things along those lines. I can understand why this sold, why You're No Good would sell a ton of albums, because it's or single CDs, or I guess it wouldn't be CDs, it would be singles, right? Or
45s.
45s, there we go. Because it's tailor made to be played on the radio, even in length. But yeah, it just didn't connect. I wouldn't say I didn't dislike the album, but nothing about it jumped out beyond just the inoffensively pleasant would be how I would describe it.
That's probably why it sold so well. To be honest.
I mean, maybe,
that's a good point.
Yep.
And it looks like the Eagles did make an appearance. It looks like Glenn Frey, Don Henley, and their Timothy B. Schmidt, the bass player, they all played on the last track.
Okay.
Well, it sounds like an Eagles song. The sound of it, the texture of it.
Yeah, and it's written by James Taylor, but James Taylor is not. He doesn't. Wikipedia doesn't have him playing on here.
Oh wait, the Eagles played it, and James Taylor. Wow, that's
correct.
That's quite the confluence of
Yep. And interesting. Let's just looked up Willin' because I was interested, like, where that song come from. That song was written by someone named Lowell George, who I don't remember covering him, but he was a former member of the Mothers of Invention,
really?
And went on to form the band Little Feat, which is where he wrote the song Willin'. So that's where that came from, actually. So that was interesting.
And Little Feat was like, they are a country band too, right?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I'm not super familiar with their work, to be quite honest.
They're like a 70s band, I feel like.
Yeah.
That's like firmly of the decade, maybe.
But it's interesting that somebody from like the Mothers of Invention with Frank Zappa would go on to do a country.
Well, I think I saw, when I did a little bit of things, that actually Linda Ronstadt, they mentioned that she toured with Toots and the Maytals at one point, which would be a very interesting show. So yeah, she kind of was of the era. It's always interesting to me when you have an artist that sells a ton of albums and then sort of like 20 years later, they're not really brought up. I'm trying to think of like who, and I don't mean to drag it into like a frame of reference for us, but like who would be the equivalent of that for us, having grown up in the 90s, right? Who would be the equivalent? You don't hear a lot about Janet Jackson anymore.
Right.
Paula Abdul, like I'm trying to think of female artists, people.
Janet Jackson she just was inducted in. I mean, are you talking about recent stuff? Because she was in the Rock and
Linda
Roll Hall of Fame.
Ronstadt was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I'm just saying, by the time the 90s came, right, was anyone even referring to Linda Ronstadt in anything, right? It was sort of like.
I just remember hearing her on the periphery. Like I think she had beef with Howard Stern, so I heard like him talk about her. But like musically, no, I don't remember.
Well, it's kind of like Janet Jackson now, right? Like you may hear about her on the periphery, but she's not really. It's not like Madonna or something where they're still being discussed, and or Prince, right? Where they're in the 80s or 90s, but they carried over. It's just weird to me when somebody sells that many albums, and then sort of. It's you have to remind yourself, oh wow,
they're very much like ephemeral. Culture in a lot of ways is ephemeral that way, right? People move on, and some people don't always, sell a ton at that time, but they don't have a lasting impact.
There's always people that like have one album that sells a ton. So if we go 90s, right, there's like Hootie and the Blowfish and Ace of Base. They have this one album, but then it's kind of like, okay, that album even Alanis Morissette, right? And then they did music, but that's kind of what they're known for. But to be the highest selling artist of the decade, and the funny thing is, who number 2 is of the decade? Could actually be another artist, Donna
Carole
Summer.
King. Oh.
Donna Summer, yeah.
I keep thinking Carole King, but Carole King just had the one album.
Just had the one album, right?
Yeah.
So that's another good example, though, of that first group, right? You have this one album that sells a ton.
Yeah.
But Donna Summer's another one that kept selling albums for most of the back end of the 70s, but you never really hear about her.
What about Mariah Carey?
She's still talked about a lot. I think she's still...
With music, or... I always think it's like more tabloid stuff.
Yeah, like she's more of a personality now, too.
But if you were to go to like a 15-year-old now, they're gonna know who Mariah Carey is. That's kind of, I guess, what my litmus test is. Like,
what would a 15-year-old
still know? Like, maybe not know their music, but like, oh, I know that person. Right. I think 15-year-old me, if you had said, do you know who Linda Ronstadt is? I would have been like, I think, like, and it's like when you're the highest selling female artist of the 70s, it's just weird that you can...
Yeah.
Because like who would we guess would be the highest selling artist of the
we'd have to
male artist of the 70s?
Yeah,
Billy Joel probably,
Elton
right?
John?
Would be my guess. Elton John or Billy Joel would be my guess, and we're certain 15-year-old me would have known who both of them were.
But we'd have to make that a fair comparison. We'd have to do like 40 years from 94 or something. We'd have to wait and see what lasts.
But I'm saying 15-year-old me, like would have pretty much been 20 years later, right? It would 21. It would have been after this. Mm-hmm. So, and by that time, so it would be okay. So going back, so somebody from 1999 who is massive. So who's selling a ton of albums? Backstreet Boys. I mean, they still are known enough that people would.
It'd probably be like Dave Matthews Band, really.
Yeah.
Or something.
Okay. Something like that. Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting comparison, but I have to point a little bit, for me, thumbs down on this one. Not true down, just a little bit leaning down.
I mean, that does. I would just say the thing. To me, I don't think that this sounds terribly dated. Like, I didn't get a feeling walking away from this going like, "Wow, this is a big '70s album." I actually I was neutral on that. I didn't really find myself thinking about how it aged or how it didn't age. It was almost, so I guess in that sense it didn't age because it didn't jump out at me. So I'm not surprised that it didn't really do a whole lot for you. I think it's a relatively simple album, but I'm a little surprised that you were like honing in on, wow, it sounds 70s, because I didn't pick up on that as much on my end.
Well, I would say that country is such a small slice of the pie that we end up covering, despite going through the decades as the genre as a whole. That I mean, how does country change through the decades? Maybe that's part of its appeal, is that it's not like changing that much, and that's why people like it.
But this is not. Let's be very honest with this. There's country, and then there's like the mainstream rock interpretation of country. So there's a whole other country that I don't think that Nashville folks are viewing Linda Ronstadt as like a true country artist. She's more like how the Byrds, I think the Byrds, did Sweetheart of the Rodeo and delved into it, or Graham Parsons, or the people that like dabble in country. But I don't think that when they're talking about like the Nashville Grand Ole Opry country, that Linda Ronstadt, like, she's sort of like a California representation of country. I think is kind of like Chris Christopherson. There's a lot of those like country-ish artists. At least that's my interpretation.
Maybe she does have more of a lasting impact in country circles. I don't know.
Perhaps, yeah.
I'm not sure. I was just surprised. I'm like, wow, I didn't know she was a country artist.
I didn't either. I got to be honest.
And it's a good question, John. Is this representative of her stuff in the 70s, or was this just kind of like dipping her toe in the water? So, I'm sure there's people out there, if anybody's listening or well more learned about her than us, that are going to be like, these guys are idiots. Like, how do,
well, right,
I don't know, So
I always welcome people to come in and blow us up on comments and say, here's why you're idiots, and like make a case, because I love to hear people that are passionate make their case for it, because at the end of the day, it's just three people's opinions, and so we're not sitting here like it's a tablet and written in stone. Yeah.
This is her highest ranked album on Best Ever Albums, and I believe it's the only one that made Rolling Stone. So it seems like it's her most highly regarded record. But
Okay.
I liked it. Pleasantly surprised on my end.
Yeah, same.